know, something about that doesn't sit right with me, but I saw it on like an IMDb or something that was a thing that was in the Vampire Diaries, so...
Well, don't worry, I don't think you're supposed to like it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah, you're not supposed to like it. But it's funny too because, well, it's not funny, but like when Twilight hit and everybody started becoming crazy about vampires, like everybody who was heavily into vampire folklore, like shunned the Twilight people because like Twilight is just so opposite of how like vampires are in the folklore. And I understand that because I came into vampirism because of Twilight, but then like I stayed and like did more research and I was like, yeah, Twilight is not an accurate representation of what actual vampires would be like today.
But like they're not supposed to be.
They're not supposed to be. It's supposed to be glamorized, but like
it's fiction, guys.
Yeah.
It's like fun YA fiction. We don't have more time for Twilight in this episode.
I can move on.
Yeah. If you have others, though, I'm happy to continue on.
Yeah, I just want to talk about the TV shows and movies now. I just have a couple ones that I want to plug in. Nosferatu, which has had many, many different like variations over the years, but the actual original one showing like what vampires should be with the pale faces, the pointy ears, the pointy teeth, and the whole 9 yards. Scooby-Doo has had vampires.
Oh, Scooby-Doo. My love.
Had to plug Scooby in. The Blade movies, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and Angel, the big ones from when I was younger. And then Underworld and True Blood. I feel like those were so different from like what vampires should have been in Underworld and True Blood. Like they were, especially with like the lycanthropy in Underworld, a lot of it was really different from the research I had been doing on vampires post Twilight and like seeing just like the way that vampires interacted with each other, like from going from Dracula to like True Blood and Underworld. It was like a big jump to me. So yeah, that's all I got. So
I'm so glad you brought that for us. Buffy was a little bit before my time, so I have never actually watched it, but like my mom likes it.
I watched the first season. It was alright.
Buffy was my obsession. I was obsessed with Spike. He was my favorite.
I've always meant to watch it, but I really grew up on Bones with David Boreanaz, so.
He's been a great actor since day one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess let's just hand this over to Meredith.
I have like about a couple pages.
Go for it.
Okay, so a vampire is a creature that sucks the life out of you. That's very vague, but that's because pretty much every culture has a version of the vampire. And even if we're defining a vampire as an undead human that specifically drinks blood, I could still go on for years about all the creatures and legends that fit that description. Most of them come from Europe, so that's where we'll focus our attention today. And since there are so many vampire myths and variations, I'm going to focus on the ones that were referenced in Supernatural. And Excellent. Then at the end, I'll discuss some of my personal favorite vampire myths.
Love it.
So nowadays we see vampires as like pale, seductive creatures of the night. They have fangs, which they use to puncture the necks of their victims so they can drink their blood. They also burst into flames when sunlight touches them, sleep in coffins, they live forever, they hate anything Christian and holy, and like to dress in black. This version of the vampire kind of really began its development in the 19th century, and it's a combination of tropes from mythology, novels, and later movies. So we'll start in Eastern Europe, where the word vampire originated. In their folklore, vampires are generally undead humans who wear shrouds, and they look like bloated, dead bodies with very ruddy complexions. They tend to prey on their loved ones. Just looking at this, my assumption is that the myth was influenced by contagious illnesses working their way through families and friends. So the person who died first is the one who killed all the others. I also think a lot of vampire myths were attempts to just rationalize the process of a body decaying. So one of the things is that, the skin will tighten around the body, making the hair and nails look longer, like they've grown. And I think dead bodies also bloat, like, as if the person has, like, gorged themselves on blood. So vampires became sexy in the 19th century, which all started with one piece of literature, which was, as was mentioned, John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819.
That guy just started a whole thing.
Actually, okay, you know the story about Mary Shelley being trapped in a cabin with Lord Byron, Percy by Shelley, and one other guy?
He was the other guy?
He was the other guy, which is awesome because, like, he and Mary Shelley ended up defining, like, vampire stories and science fiction, respectively.
Yeah, monster stories.
Wow.
Like, good job, guys. In Polidori's story, that rhymed, the vampire, Lord Ruthven, is a charismatic aristocrat who seduces and preys upon young women, an image that would become popular and has endured to the present day, unfortunately. After the vampire, the two stories stories I usually hear about are Carmilla in 1872, written by Sheridan Le Fanu, and then Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1897. So they were also both mentioned. Of the three, Dracula is the only one that I've read, and I personally think it lives up to the hype, though I really think it is so good. But also I really don't think that Dracula was sexy. Like, why did they keep trying to make him attractive? I have no idea if he was, like, supposed to be, and I'm just too ace to understand, but there was nothing attractive about this man. He has, like, hairy palms, bad breath, and doesn't believe in consent. But anyway, Carmilla stands out because it's about a lesbian vampire. From what I've read about it, it's surprisingly feminist, since the story is, like, driven by female characters, and lesbianism isn't portrayed as something, like, inherently monstrous or predatory. I mean, Carmilla is a creepy stalker, but, like, the protagonist Laura isn't. Still, it's Victorian, so if you don't like stories where monsters or gay people die, proceed with caution. Now, with a foundation established, let's move on to the vampire tropes in Supernatural. First, they drink blood to survive, and as I mentioned earlier, being a vampire doesn't necessarily mean you drink blood. The idea is to consume the vital essence of the living, so this can be blood, unfortunately it can also be semen, or even just your energy and liveliness. Most of the time, however, they drink blood. That's fairly universal. Second, the vampires are made, they're not born. In folklore, there are hundreds of ways to become a vampire. If you offend God, you're at risk. If you're the seventh son of the seventh son, you're at risk. If you straight up die and your culture believes in vampires, you're also at risk. It's just, you can't win. The one constant is that vampires used to be human. So here, a person transforms into a vampire after drinking a vampire's blood. I didn't find out where this originated, but it is featured in Dracula. Over a period of several months, Dracula secretly feeds his blood to a young woman named Lucy Westenra. She slowly becomes paler and weaker, while her teeth start to look a little longer and sharper. Except for the teeth thing, it again looks like she's suffering from an illness, which is exactly what the other characters assume until she dies and starts rising from her crypt to kidnap small children. It's very fun. Third, vampires have fangs. In this case, they have a lot of them. So this is actually a recent thing. Lord Ruthven's teeth were never mentioned, and as far as I know, Eastern European vampires never had any special teeth either. In the 1840s, the character Varney the Vampire was described as having fang-like teeth, and then later, Carmilla and Dracula both had actual fangs. So since then, most vampires have had fangs, which is great because I love fangs. Fourth, vampires are sensitive to sunlight. This is even more recent than fangs. The original folklore, as far as I know, made no mention of sunlight-harming vampires, and Lord Ruthven, Varney the Vampire, Carmilla, and Dracula were also not affected by it. I think so. I can't remember with Dracula. But the first instance of sunlight-harming vampires is probably in the silent film Nosferatu in 1922. I'm assuming it's related to vampires like being creatures of the night, so they don't like sun, seeing as how like Carmilla and Dracula were both more powerful at night, and Dracula was also nocturnal. So fifth, on Supernatural, you kill vampires by decapitating them. There are lots of ways to dispose of a vampire, but this one is German and Western Slavic. It's a way of forcing the person's soul to leave their bodies so they'll finally be laid to rest. Also, this is proof that vampires have souls.
Huh. Oh.
Interesting. In this particular myth, anyway.
Edward was wrong then.
Edward's wrong about a lot of things.
True.
Oh yeah.
Okay, now we'll move on to some fun vampire myths that have absolutely nothing to do with Supernatural. So there's the belief that vampires are obsessed with counting, and that you can distract them by throwing like a bunch of seeds or grains at them, and because then they're like compelled to kneel down and count each one like individually, and it's hilarious.
That's a pretty common fairy thing.
Yeah,
just
exactly.
like leprechauns.
Exactly. I don't know where this...
Is that why in Sesame Street the Count is a vampire?
Okay,
Yeah.
I was actually about to mention that. I've only seen this addressed with vampires twice. Sesame Street and the X-Files. Season 5, episode 12, Bad Blood. It's absolutely hilarious. Like Mulder throws a bunch of sunflower seeds at the vampire, and it just goes, "Oh man, I wish you hadn't done that." It keeps kneeling down like, "You're gonna be sorry."
The Count is my favorite Sesame Street character, just for the record, in case anybody wanted to know that.
Alright,
I love his
will
laugh.
I'll commit that to memory.
My dad does the Count impression. It's very funny.
My personal favorite vampire myth is actually Celtic. There's a race of fairies called the Bovenshee. They appear as pale, beautiful women who will lure young men away at night to dance with them. And once the men are exhausted, the Bovenshee will use their long, sharp claws to slit their throats and drink their blood.
I would fall for that.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. Hook, line, and sinker. The last vampire myth is one of the greatest things I have ever read, and I think KJ will remember this.
I would do. I already know what it is.
It's from the Roma have people in Serbia who believe that anything left outside the house on the night of the full moon will turn into a vampire. And I mean anything. Including pumpkins.
Oh.
The pumpkins will start to vibrate and move around the house while making this growling noise, and they don't suck blood. Instead, they'll eat, like, little human bits they find, like excrement, flakes of dead skin, nail clippings, and stray hairs. And it's amazing, and I want one, and it's basically an organic Roomba.
I want to say it was like 3 months ago or so. I get a random message from Meredith being like, I just found the greatest thing ever. Vampire pumpkins. And she starts telling me about them. I'm like, holy shit, I want one.
Actually, I read about them a few years ago, and I think I just, like, saw the opportunity to tell you.
Yeah, I forget what we were talking about.
Just, this is amazing, and I need to see more people use this, because I need it.
I want a vampire pumpkin Roomba.
Yes.
And the book was also telling me, like, people would, like, kill them by boiling them in water, and I'm just like, wait, go back. Why would you do that? It's cleaning up your floor.
It's just vibrating around looking for little bits of dead skin and hair.
It's fine. Apparently it bleeds, but it absorbs its own blood, so it cleans up its own mess, too.
Oh, it's the best pet in the world.
I want it.
I'm just picturing the little pumpkin dog in Steven Universe.
So mythology will always surprise you. It's so much more ridiculous and fun than you think it is.
That was delightful. That was a good note to end on.
In conclusion, vampires are cool and confusing, and you can do whatever you want with them because there's way more variety than you think.
Let's do highlight and lowlight. So let's start with Julia. If Julia is ready.
I am not.
Would you like us to come back to you?
Yes, please.
Okay, let's go to Francis.
Alright, so my highlight is when Sam and John were having their argument, and Sam was basically, like, letting out what he's been wanting to let out for a while. So I thought that was really good. And also, John saying that he was wrong. Like, that never happens. That'll never happen again. But
Yep.
he said he was wrong. And my lowlight, I literally only wrote 2 words. John Winchester.
That's very fair. I'm surprised that isn't mine. Usually any episode where we see John, that is mine, but it is not this week. Meredith, what's yours?
So highlight, I really like Dean standing up to John.
Yes.
I feel like that was a lot harder for him to do than it was for Sam to do. So it was cool to see him just do that. Low light, John is a very easy choice, but I'm gonna go with how the vampires prisoners were treated. That was really uncomfortable. Also, Jenny got Stockholm syndrome, so
Yeah.
gross.
Poor Jenny. Back to Julia.
Actually, I 100% agree with Meredith. My highlight was Dean standing up to John, and my low light was the whole Kate, Jenny on-screen fiasco. I did not enjoy that at all.
That's totally fair. My low light is the overtly sexual overtones of every interaction with Kate. Specifically Kate. It was very uncomfortable. And that's someone who identifies as a woman and who likes women. This was not it. This was not the look.
It was not.
My highlight is Sam and John's fight in the middle of the road. Nothing makes me more angry with Sam than when he rolls over on his opinion of John. And he's like, oh yeah, Dad, I guess he did the best he could. Nothing makes me more mad at him. And I'm including a lot of the horrible things that Sam does in 15 years. Like, Sam Winchester is a hot-tempered, stubborn, angry man who values his automatism over pretty much everything, and I want to see him stand up for himself, so I was very happy.
Mm-hmm.
This fight in the middle of the roads where Sam's like yelling at just everything I want. Call CPS, which is our segment. It's not maybe a CPS moment, but it feels like if someone comes in and closes out their kids' college funds when the kids are like a baby and 4 years old, there should be some sort of like special authority that the bank teller can call to have someone check on the family.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah.
Like, John just walked into a bank one day and was like, yeah, my kids don't need to go to college anymore. No, everyone was like, oh, that's not my business.
Sorry, I need this for gun money.
I need to buy ammunition.
It's like, sir, what happened to your children? What's going to happen to your children?
Don't worry about it. I'd like that gun, though.
Well, especially if the bank was in the same town that they were living in, like, they knew that John's wife had just died in a fire in their house, so, like, what are you doing with that money, John?
Yeah, and he, like, didn't fix up the house again. They just disappeared then after that. I feel like when they went missing, someone should have been, oh yeah, he cleared out his bank account and he's missing.
As far as they knew, he could have been taking his kids into the woods to shoot them.
Literally.
Right?
I don't know if CPS would have necessarily been the move, but there should be some sort of authority that bank tellers can call to be like, this guy just cleared his bank accounts. Can someone check on this guy? Maybe just the police for a wellness check. We really need like another group, like another institution that will take on wellness checks. But in the meantime, we're gonna go with police.
Someone to